Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Aaron Boyd, Senior Editor for Technology and Events at NextGov, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, The Next Big Network, underwritten by Cisco. During this webcast, we'll delve into the world of future network architectures and how they can impact security and user experience. We'll be fielding audience Q&A toward the end of the program, so be sure to ask questions in the panel to the right-hand side of your screen. This webcast is also being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing later this week. Now let's meet today's speakers. Joining me today is Timothy Persons, Chief Scientist and Managing Director of Science, Technology, Assessment, and Analytics at the Government Accountability Office. Alan Hill, Executive Director of the Office of Telecommunications Services within the Office of Information Technology category at the General Services Administration. And Jim Russo, Technical Director for the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions Program, also within the Office of Information Technology category at GSA. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. I'd like to start off with having you all introduce yourself. Alan, let's start with you. Who are you? What does that title we just read off mean? And how is your job related to network infrastructure?
Thank you, Aaron. I'm the Executive Director responsible for telecommunication. EIS, Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, is the $50 billion 15-year program that is called out both from the President's management agenda and IT modernization to help federal networks be modernized to the 21st century. Myself, I'm retired Air Force, been a systems engineer all my career, and now I have the opportunity to work to help work on modernizing the federal infrastructure throughout both the DoD and federal agencies.
Excellent. And Jim, you work in the same office. How does your job differ? What do you do?
Okay, well, I work, as you said, in the same office under Alan. I'm with I'm really focusing on the EIS program, as you mentioned, title technical director for that. Also, I've been focusing on the Trusted Internet Connection update. So CISA came out with a policy late last year, and we've been collaborating very closely with our friends at CISA as they put out TIC 3 guidance. So we've been working with both our agency customers, industry, to turn that guidance into solutions and services that can be purchased through EIS and some other GSA contracts. So, yeah, that pretty much covers my focus lately. It's try to help the agencies figure out the balance between COVID response, transition from expiring contracts to EIS, and then IT modernization along the way. And of course, cybersecurity is a big part of that.
Yeah, I imagine there's there's a lot I want to dig into there, primarily with the EIS with both of you and TIC as well, and COVID and all of it. Before we get there, Tim, I want to make sure you jump in here as well. Who are you and what are you doing over at GAO?
Great. Hi, Aaron. Thank you for that. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Tim Persons. I'm the Chief Scientist of the GAO and the Managing Director for our newest team, the Science, Technology, Assessment, and Analytics team. There's a lot there. GAO is best known as the watchdog for the federal government. We are one of the few congressional agencies. And in my role, I support essentially all of GAO's work in terms of oversight, insight, and foresight analysis, and then also in terms of activities on innovation for next generation analytics and data science and so on. So we do a lot of work in this particular area. We have a sister team also at GAO who's called the Information Technology and Cybersecurity team. So, I'm one of two teams that deal with technology and issues, but we've done a lot of work on 5G, on AI, on data analytics, and on advanced communication systems and Internet of Things and so on. So it's great to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And Tim, I'd like to start our discussion with you then. As the representative from GAO, you've got that 50,000-foot view of the federal enterprise and what's going on all over the place. So first off, what would you say is the current state of federal networks? How would you describe them? Where are they at today? What decade and century are they in?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it varies from agency and department and so on, but I think that there are systems that have to be maintained, legacy systems just by nature of the mission. But a lot of the technology in cases, even baseline technologies, we're still kind of in the late 20th century, is what we're seeing in parts of the government. I think it just goes toward the more static view, or what I think of as the Maginot Line defensive view from with respect to sort of IT and cybersecurity. There's reasons for that, or legacy reasons and so on. But I think what we're pivoting and seeing is, in our 21st century world, we have a lot of opportunity here in the federal network space, in the advanced computational architectures, certainly improve and modernize and update based upon the dynamic and increasing needs of the government.
Excellent. So if that's kind of where the current state is, you mentioned some of them are legacy systems, some in some places by design, some places because they haven't got a chance to modernize them yet. It's a bit of a mixed bag all across there. Where would you say networks should be today, and where are they going into the future, right? What's the, I imagine you're going to talk about things like software-defined networking and the like, right? So
yes, right.
The federal system, while it may lag in certain areas, where do you think it should be right about now, and where are they headed?
Right. So I think there's a lot of opportunity with the various technologies I mentioned that we're working in. I have done work in, like 5G and AI and so on, IoT. I think there's a lot of opportunity to transform into an updated system that's more dynamic, that moves computing from the core to the edge. It changes the way we have to think about security. You now have to hypothesize what's called the zero trust hypothesis on that, and how we adapt and adjust our networks. So software-defined virtualization, cloud IT has brought a lot of everything as a service, both the infrastructure, the platform, the software. So I think we have to think in that dynamic, again, movement from a core into an edge type domain. I think we're still going to have to dot our I's and cross our T's with respect to encryption. Authentication is always, I think it's gotten harder. It's always been hard, even in our 20th century context, but now where we are and the demands of the network, the performance that are required, I think that's going to be a big problem to solve. But and I think a lot of the core principles of cybersecurity and hygiene are still there. It's just that it's exponentiated with all of these convergent technologies, again, just making it everywhere. And so it's just having to change our thinking at speed and at scale and in a very dynamic way.
Alan, we just heard about a lot of technologies that are coming to the fore, things like, I mentioned software-defined networking, as did Tim. I also mentioned, things like 5G, zero trust, all these other technology things that are coming down the pike. Did you write all those into the requirements for EIS?
So in EIS, it's capable of delivering all those types of services. In the case of, in some stats in terms of opportunities that are out there, we have approximately 151 fair opportunities that are coming out through EIS. Of those, we have 35 that have been, solicitations have been awarded. Out of those 35 solicitations, there's been 46 task orders awarded. That's approximately about $5 billion in awards right now in terms of total value of what those awards are worth. We still have 70 that are out there on the street right now. So that's a lot of opportunity, and we still have a fair amount still remaining that we need to work through. For example, Tim talked about Sd-Wan. Sd-Wan has been called out in a number of solicitations. We have at least 21 where they clearly ask for Sd-Wan capabilities. And that's important because as we move to, our networks need to be able to not only move to the cloud, but also the future state of moving to the edge. And that's where 5G software-defined networking comes in. Network function virtualization, that enables us to be more on demand and increasing capacity and reducing. In the situation where COVID-19 occurred, agencies had to go through a lot of the mundane process of, I need to add licenses, I need to add additional bandwidth. We need to make the network more expand and contract based on demand, not where we have to go through the mechanics of actually doing it and punching papers and improving processes in that way.
You mentioned the current status of everything. And you mentioned, so one of the things that we heard when EIS was first in development, right, when the drafts were coming out and as it was coming before the final releases, was that this was going to be not just a shift over from previous network contracts like networks, but really an opportunity for agencies to modernize, to upgrade their networks. That was a big focus, a big push from you all. Are you seeing that in the solicitations? What's come through, either what's been awarded already or what's coming down the pike? Is everyone looking to just kind of switch over and then modernize along the way, or are they trying to, as soon as the contract's awarded, work starts?
So it kind of depends upon the agency whether they can flip the switch to modernize or not, because there's a lot to do in order to prep for that. There are some agencies that are right out the bat modernization out in what they have in their solicitations. Some agencies, and it's only fair to the vendor that's awarded that, there might be some preparatory work before they be able to do that modernization. For example, TDM, we have a lot of TDM out there in our federal networks. We got to eliminate a lot of that. That is not where you just, flip a switch and you move to Ethernet or SD-WAN. There's a lot of prep work that needs to be done in that case. So maybe it might make sense for the vendor to come in to take over the TDM, but then put the necessary infrastructure in place to where they can move to the more modern type infrastructure.
So is that something that networks didn't have, previous contracts didn't have? Were they, the previous versions of this, did they have the ability to modernize through those, or was it more about just the status quo? Why did we need a new contract for all this?
I would say that there was not a concerted effort in modernizing the network, and where with the president's management agenda of actually focusing on modernizing the infrastructure. So the fact that we have executive leadership on down pushing the modernization is part of the catalyst of us moving forward and being able to do that. EIS was put in place with the concept of making sure that we can use a lot of the type of cloud technologies that are out there, along with still keeping alive what is legacy, but to get off it as quickly as possible. But in terms of EIS, was it intended for the sole purpose of modernization? The life of the contracts for the legacy contracts were coming in and it had to be replaced. But my predecessors had the forethought of saying we shouldn't just change the legacy networks to existing ones, but we should also modernize. So that my predecessors had that foresight to be able to do that into the contract, provide that into the contract.
Yeah, I just, Aaron, if I may, I just want to piggyback on Alan real quick, because
Sure.
those mechanisms are important in terms of what he's saying. I think the other issue that we're seeing is that a lot of this is, the technology is there. It is a challenging part of the equation, but so much of this is about change management and culture as well. And so a lot of this begs for sort of more of an agile methodology, thinking a little bit differently about our process of development toward acquisition, and using spins and iterations and so on for rapid create rapid development, so that based on sandbox type environments, like something that we've done at GAO's created an innovation lab, so that we can try new things and fail quickly, as it were, not for failure's sake, but for knowledge building sake, to be able to turn and pivot, so that we have better insight in terms of how to deal with these sort of advanced and emerging technologies.
Interesting. Alan or Jim, what do you think about that with regard to EIS? I mean, is there flexibility built into that, or if someone signs on with a specific vendor to do some work, are they going to end up getting just basically what they asked for, or is there constant modernization built into this over the next 15 years?
Well, Aaron, when we were setting up the contract, I was part of the development team. We always used to ask ourselves, well, what's going to be in place in the year 2032? Because that's when contracts were going to expire. So we knew we couldn't be static. That just look at the calendar, you could tell that would never work. So there was a little bit of built-in impetus to think forward on this. So we did, to Alan's point, we did build in modernization from the get-go, in terms of basically challenging our industry partners to be that we were going to be looking for innovation in the SDN space, 5G. We specifically wrote 5G into the contract, even though it was years away, for instance. So, there was that modernization thought from the beginning. And also to tag on to what Alan said, the IT modernization report that came out at the end of 2017 really focused on bringing agencies forward in the areas of moving to the cloud, improving cybersecurity posture across the federal government, and doing something about acquisition, making it easier and more agile to acquire services going forward, and to help that, and that being a help to modernization. So, we've kept those in our focus in terms of how we're taking, for example, TIC. TIC on our previous contracts was pretty much a stone tablets type, fixed service. We had the requirements. Those requirements were given to the the industry partners. They created a solution to meet those requirements. We ATO'd them, we validated them, and we offered them for sale. And they stayed pretty much static for years. That's definitely not the approach going forward with the new TIC guidance. The TIC update that came out from OMB and the subsequent guidance from CISA is, just underscoring that you're going to have a baseline of security services. It's going to be based on your risk profile and what your requirements are going forward, but that's going to be constantly shifting. The threat vector is changing. You can't have static security solutions anymore. So we've really, as Alan said, some of those services that underpin and enable a better cybersecurity, like Sd-Wan, they were available through the contract from the beginning, and now we're taking the time to go back and be a little more standard about it in terms of how we define them on the contract. It's not really to standardize them per se, but it is a way to make it more obvious to both industry and agencies as to what you can expect under a particular service, and then how you can buy it, instead of everybody just trying to figure something out on the fly. So we're doing that now. We understand, there's really not a greenfield environment for most agencies, so they've got to step forward, carefully, not break the legacy stuff, but move forward a more modern network.
So telling what Jim said, Aaron, one of the things that we do is we do these scope reviews, and anytime there's opportunity to provide feedback to the agencies from a modernization perspective, we do that during those scope reviews. One, it's not just from the perspective of is the solicitation compliant? It is, are they taking everything into consideration? And particularly for the small and medium agencies, they need that help because they don't necessarily carry the staff that has those technical expertise. And Jim's staff, one of the things he's responsible for is bringing those type of creative ideas on how they can modernize.
So this might be more appropriate for Jim then, if his staff's doing that work specifically. How are you figuring out what an agency needs? Because you're not in, small agency X. So when they come to you and they show you their solicitation and you look at it, how do you know if they're not trying to be progressive enough?
Well, again, that really dependent on the agency, but you always have to start with, what do they have? What's their inventory? How can they leverage what they've got today moving forward? Or do they have to basically rip it up and start over again? For things such as moving from legacy voice to a voice over IP solution, that answer is pretty simple. But let's say an agency has MTIPs today and they want to move forward, but they don't really have a software-defined network. They have pretty much a legacy network. Does it make sense for them just to say, oh, I need the newest and latest thing if everything's still on premise? No. But you want to try to guide them towards, okay, what can you move to the cloud? What needs to stay behind, perhaps? Maybe there isn't anything. Maybe everything moves to the cloud. But you have to go through all of that first to figure out for them, or to help guide them towards, how should they modernize? Now, we have some tools that we can deliver. We can sit down with the agencies and sort of walk them through a list of requirements or a list of services that are on the contract, and almost quiz them as we go through. Okay, what do you have here? What do you need here? And try to match what they have today to the requirements. And then, as we know, new services have come out to better do better serve those needs, try to walk them in that direction. Having said that, as Alan said earlier, there's some agencies that are running ahead of us. They've embraced everything's going to the cloud. They're doing pilots with cloud service providers on how they can embed security in the cloud. And we leverage from them. We learn what they're doing. And if there's things there that we can share with other agencies, we can say, oh, for instance, SBA has been a leader here. We say, oh, look at what SBA is doing. You should maybe go over and talk to them and get their lessons learned and try to apply it to your situation. So, and then other agencies in a similar fashion. So yeah, there's sort of a crawl, walk, run aspect to some of this that, you have to wrap your arms around the problem first. And then once you do as an agency, then you can move forward instead of just trying to grasp at the answer and oh, that vendor showed me a real nice solution. I think I'll buy that and that'll solve all my problems. That's not the way to go. That's how we advise the agencies.
Interesting. So we've been talking a lot about trying to build flexibility into this contract. And I can think of two areas that I'd like to continue that conversation on. One being TIC that you mentioned before, Jim, right? This is something that is very much still in development. I know you've been working with the TIC program office, but for instance, right now they have 2 draft use cases out for the headquarters and for branch offices, but they don't yet even have drafts out for things like remote users, which leads me to my second modernization challenge we've got right now, which is the current COVID-19 pandemic. So this is kind of a rubber hits the road moment, I imagine, for a lot of agencies where they were preparing these solicitations, they were putting them out, they were making awards. Were those, obviously they weren't prepared for coronavirus because nobody was thinking about this a year ago. But are these solicitations equipped to handle something like this, all this move to telework, the idea of having to have those edge devices secured? Are they flowing back through agency headquarters to route the traffic to be secure through TIC? Or is EIS able to help them do more of this securely without those latency issues and security issues?
Yeah, well, the COVID situation definitely served as a wake-up call for moving agencies forward there. Some in our situation at GSA, we've done basically a very large level of telework for the last 7-8 years, at our headquarters, and so we've already gone through a lot of the lessons learned. We've already, I wouldn't say, I guess maybe a term is mass telework environment, even though that may be a little misleading. But we've stumbled upon a lot of things that some of the agencies are just finding out now. So when this hit, our IT shop did have to tweak the network. They did have to do some load balancing. They did have to add some capacity, but we were better prepared than some agencies that have shared their story, and they've had to increase their capacity by hundreds of percent, for instance, to satisfy the current needs. So in a way, that you could say kickstarted the remote access use case. I think everyone may be aware that CISA came out early in April with some interim telework guidance, which really isn't the remote access use case. It might be something that leads to it, but it definitely did scramble the cadence a little bit of where everybody was heading. That's
so as it
can't deny that.
With those things under consideration, has anyone come back to you to amend or otherwise update their solicitations for EIS? Are they learning these lessons and going, oh, we need to fix this through this big program?
Some of that just had to happen immediately, and so those could be handled either by them adjusting a current contract in place, or accelerating their move to EIS. In terms of massive restructuring of a solicitation, it's a little hard to tell. Some agencies may have taken that opportunity to do another check of their solicitation before they went final with it, which again, we wouldn't see necessarily. But I don't think there's been much in the way of getting new or reissued solicitations to us for scope review. So I think it did accelerate the thinking in this area. I think it cemented where the agencies wanted to go with their solicitations. The solicitations in these areas were pretty wide open because they would state that they, for instance, in the tick area, some of them that weren't ready to make the leap yet would say, okay, I need to transition. I have a deadline. I haven't quite sorted out my risk profile. I haven't sorted out what's going to the cloud and what's not. And even the stuff in the cloud, I'm not sure what the native cloud cybersecurity is yet because a lot of stuff's still being brewed. So let me start with them tips and very quickly pivot to the new, a new tick solution once that guidance becomes a little more firm. So, we're changing the tires while the car is running, right? Or moving. And,
and doing it from home.
Yeah, right. And doing it from home in our backgrounds, wherever they may be. So, that's added a lot of complicating factors, but I think the path is still pretty much the same. Agencies are going to move to the cloud. They're going to look at better ways to structure their network. They're going to employ SD-WAN. They're going to look at other opportunities to now sort of translate what TIC used to do in a fixed position out to a cloud environment. What do you do for a multi-cloud environment? But so some of that will come through. You're still going to look at the situation similarly. You may look at, okay, what's my security patterns? You're going to follow the guidance that CISA has put out there, to where you look at where the users are, how do they get to assets? Where are the assets? Are the assets still on premises of the agency? Are they in the cloud? Are they accessible over the internet? Do they have to go back through the agency, DMZ, so to speak? Or can they go through a CASB? Can they go directly to the cloud? So a ton of variables. They didn't change, but now I think, once the initial shock and awe is over and, okay, we're functioning, our VPN's not breaking down, the workers have the tools they need, we're good, we can get things done. Now we really need to be serious about, how we determine how architecture is going to run going forward. So there's a lot more interest in solutions that are being developed on the fly. Go ahead, Alan.
So, Aaron, one thing to touch on that, and because we're talking about making adjustments, and this is the mechanics we're talking about. So, one of the things Jim's team is focused on is network as a service, security as a service. We need to make our network more cloud-like. We're moving computing into the cloud, but as 5G becomes more of a reality, computing at the edge becomes more a reality. And this is where we have to be able to move processing back and forth from the cloud to the edge, because we can't have everything always coming from cloud. We can't have big pipes all the time. And so we need to be able to have that information move back and forth securely. And this is where network as a service, security as a service becomes more prominent. And so Jim is tasked to get those capabilities built up to where agencies can be doing that, particularly the small and medium agencies that don't have the staff that the large agencies do to manage networks.
So that's those services and all those considerations are built into the solicitations and task orders people are putting out, or is that just something that you're telling people to consider and make sure that they have, say, like a bolt-on security considerations?
So agencies right now are using more managed service type perspective, vice and as a service type, and we need to take our IT staff to be more focused on the cybersecurity. But for example, network as a service, why are we going out there, provision the pipes, provision the devices and things like that? SD-WAN provides us that ability so that the providers can turn around, turn up circuits, turn them down on the fly without having to do that and letting them just manage that. Those that are in that competency to be able to manage that. Those that are security providers to be able to provide the security. Those that are network providers to be able to provide the network, and make it more elastic in nature, so that as we need to shift our computing back and forth from cloud to edge, 5G is going to break open those doors and be able to do that. And we need to be able to make sure that the services are able to adapt to and have an intelligent network.
Tim, did I see you trying to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, building on what Alan and Jim have been talking about. I think there's a number of elements here. Again, back to that sort of organizational culture and change and things. The way we think about contracting, that's kind of implied in your questions, Aaron, I think is there. I've seen agency where the acquisition was used to like buying racks and stacks of hardware and things, and it wasn't used to the idea of more like a broad purchase agreement or a BPA type structure or IDIQ-ish thing to buy enough what I'll call pounds of cloud or whatever it is, much less across all the various services that Jim Allen and I have been talking about in the everything as a service type domain. So I think there's some fundamental training, just the way we think about our acquisition system overall, I think we just have to rethink it. I think the motherhood and apple pie of the FAR is still there. It still needs to be there. That's not the key issue, but how we express it in the way to take advantage of this sort of this watershed moment. No one wants the COVID crisis. We want to get out of it. We want to return to a state of normalcy, as it were. But I think returning to the state means we probably have a chance to sort of rethink and reset some of these conversations and take advantage of that, where we essentially already are started to push work and things out to the edge with our people working at home instead of sitting in downtown DC. That sort of, there's some natural things that have already started to happen. So how do we capitalize on that and do that, not just rushing to novelty for novelty's sake, like Jim was talking about, but trying out to focus on defining the problem first, being able to de-risk it through a managed process, have a sandbox, have some small pilot prototype type things that you can learn on, and then as you learn, then you transition that into more of a full-blown acquisition. But again, in this new conception of acquisition in terms of the way you purchase your IT and the way you secure it.
And Tim, real quick, from your perspective, have you seen agencies doing that? Have you seen them building sandboxes and the like to test out systems with regard specifically to EIS, or are they doing it more in other areas and trying to apply those lessons?
Sure. I won't speak to the EIS. I don't know about the sort of, I haven't looked at the issues across who may or may not be doing EIS, but on general sandboxes with these sort of technologies and convergent type things, of which EIS could easily be a part of, I've seen an increasing number of these sandbox-like environments and so on. When you just think about the advent of AI and driverless cars, I mean, our Department of Transportation has been very innovative to create a way to just understand AI algorithms better, and because the risks are there in terms of human life in the cars and things like that. So they've set up sandboxes and places for the cars to go around and things to do, like throw a trash can in front of it to see if you can fool it or make sure the car stops safely and so on. So I mean, in a like manner, any of these the mission tasks and organizational functions can be, I think, tested in this way, and I think there are key mechanisms to try and do that toward an overall IT modernization campaign.
Excellent. All right, so I've got one more for Alan, and then we're going to go to some audience Q&A. So if you haven't gotten your questions in yet, file those now or forever be silent. Alan, one of the things we've talked a little bit about as we've been talking here is, for instance, with COVID and all that going on, it's delaying a lot of things. And the EIS transition itself has been delayed a few times. Originally, a lot of those solicitations were supposed to be out last year. Some of them got pushed out for a lot of reasons. So I wanted to ask you, where are we at with this timeline right now? When do you think that everybody will start really making awards and switching over? And how has the current pandemic affected that timeline?
So thank you, Aaron, for the question. I'll say that my agency managers have reached out to all the agencies, and there is actually only a few agencies that have been impacted by the COVID-19 because of where they're at, and it's primarily agencies that have awarded task orders, for example, and a vendor may be trying to get access to a facility for purpose of a site survey, but they can't get it because there's nobody there to give them access. So we're seeing for those few agencies a month or two delay in impact. And the way we're going to handle this is that we're going to look agency by agency once everything is all hopefully back normalized, and we'll make determinations based on those agencies if anything should change. But we're not going to say holistically the entire program should be delayed, because most of the agencies are making great progress despite what's happening.
Excellent. So do you have a final drop date where you know you're not going to have to extend networks anymore or anything, and everybody's going to be shifted over?
So networks and all the legacy contracts are extended until May of 2023. Okay. We have agencies' milestones to complete transition by September 2022. That cushion we have between September 2022 to May of 2023 is for the purpose of taking those few agencies that may have some impact to be able to have a little wiggle room to work with them. One thing that we are doing, we're running dual operations by maintaining both what is supported for EIS and what is also being supported for the legacy contracts. We can't continue to run dual operations. That's a cost that we can't continue to have go on. And so we'll be looking at that, and all the agencies understand the importance of meeting that September 2022 date. My belief is that a majority of those agencies will meet those dates. I'll say, for example, the Department of Defense, huge in responsibility what they have and making great progress. And for a large agency to be able to make that kind of progress that they're doing, I believe they will make that September date.
And I know every agency is going to be different and probably drastically different. So I don't know how you could necessarily answer this question, but I'll give it to you anyways. Is how far out do agencies have to have work started, right? Have task orders issued, awarded, have people coming in and doing the work ahead of that 2022 deadline just to get everything done?
Yes, it depends on the size and scope and complexity of what their solicitation is. And I'll say this, if you are a large agency and you have a single solicitation that kind of encompasses all the work, maybe that would be a lot more complex and a lot more difficult for a vendor to be able to do that all within that timeline. Where if the agency had broken it up maybe to several task orders, it becomes a lot more digestible and be able to do that. So it really depends upon that agency and how they put the solicitation out, and also what the requirement was for the vendor and what they proposed in terms of how they can transition. To me, I believe in giving the vendor the opportunity to propose back of how, say, I need this done by September 2022. Tell me how you scale up to meet that time frame. And the companies can scale up. You know, it's a matter of just, if they need to have multiple type projects going on in parallel in order to do that, companies can do that.
Excellent. So let's move over to the Q&A then. To start off, we've got a three-part question that was submitted by a agency official that wanted to remain anonymous. It is a little bit involved, so I'm going to ask each of the three parts separately. So first off, how many agencies have ended up with their previous incumbent vendor?
I don't have those stats on that information. I'll say that we are getting a lot of diverse companies being awarded. It's not been all the incumbent being awarded, just off of.
And I know one of the big pushes of EIS was to get more smaller vendors involved as well that weren't able to work on the big contracts in the past. Have you seen a lot of utilization of those smaller vendors, especially now that they're all ATO'd?
So Metel, for example, has been awarded several task orders already, and so they're a small business. Not all the vendors have won something yet, but they are all in the running.
Excellent. So second part of that other question, how many agencies have consolidated their contracts before moving? So, you know, versus how many are doing fewer actual contracts as they move off of networks onto EIS, and how many are, like you said, maybe expanding them and breaking them out a little bit?
Yeah, so most of the contracts or solicitation for opportunities could be based on funded line. You know, for example, the Department of Defense has 50 fair opportunities because they have different large program. Department of Homeland Security has, for the headquarters, with certain components, are going to have 2 solicitations come out, for what they're going to do. But there are some components, I believe 7 components that are going to have their own fair opportunities. And so it just really depends on the agency himself and whether they have one or many.
Excellent. And actually, the third part of this question is similar to my follow-up from before, but I'll ask it because it is a little nuanced if you want to get into the weeds here. The third part asks if any agencies at all have used the small vendors for any considerable pieces of their migration. So you mentioned that there are awards going out to small vendors. The nuance there being for a major part of a migration for any agency.
I can't speak to exactly what the details are, but Medtel's award was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Fair
enough. Next question here. It's a little bit pointed, but I think it's something you all would be happy to talk about here a little more, which is EIS actually working, or is it just networks all over again?
I'll say it is working. And the reason why it is working is because it gives the agencies, not from just perspective of being able to modernize, but they don't have to go out there and redo solicitations over and over again. If they need new capabilities, the contract's built so it allows those capabilities to be built in. Now, what I would advocate is to move to an as-a-service model so that you're not worrying about it. So, for example, if you have a piece of software that today that the vendor is using, and if you look at the cloud and how it works, the back-end engine of the cloud gets changed out without the users having to worry about it. We need the network to happen to do the same way. So if there is a network device that's out there right now, a router or a switch, that's a physical device, virtualizing that capability and being able to change the capabilities as we need to, that leaving it for that vendor to be able to do that will make it a lot more agile to what we need in future business needs.
Excellent. We got one more here, and it's a little tangential to what we're talking about. But Tim, I think you could weigh in on this, and then Alan or Jim, if you want to talk about it with regard to your programs. But the question is, how far along is the U.S. with 5G compared to China?
Yeah, it's a great question. We could go into quite a bit of detail on that. I'm leading a major study that's coming out in just a couple months on this. But I think the bottom line answer is the U.S. is not where it needs to be with respect to peer competition with China. Part of that, if you measure by patents, there's Bloomberg reported in June somewhere over 54,000 patents just out of China. When you look at the combined patent portfolio of all Chinese companies, including Huawei, it was 2/3 to 1/3 approximate ratio of China versus not just the U.S. but the entire West. So China also has a distinct advantage in terms of Chinese companies, or in Huawei's case, being able to have an end-to-end solution on the hardware, the software, the systems, and so on, not just like when you think about a U.S. company like Qualcomm or something that specializes in chips and things like that. That's a key component of the future and emerging 5G network. But we're again talking about end-to-end. There has been no company that's been able to peer compete in that domain. So price points of being able to use and sell at significant discounts in order to their equipment. So on. So it is a key competitiveness issue for the United States.
Yeah. So to wrap up here, Alan, Jim, what does that mean for you all over at EIS, especially when you add in things like the telecom bans that restrict the use of some of these Chinese telecom services? What does that mean for implementing 5G through EIS?
So one of the things that I'm a part of is part of the president put an executive order in place for the national strategy to implement 5G. And there are multiple agencies all involved in that. GSA has a supporting role in that function. And how we roll out 5G in a secure fashion. We're going to work with our fellow agencies that are leading those efforts to make sure that whatever is put into the strategy, that we put that into our acquisitions. And so that when 5G is rolled out, we know that it's rolled out to where the citizens can use it in confidence without the threat of security.
Excellent. And we have about 30 to 45 seconds. Jim, haven't heard from you in a second. Did you want to send us off?
Well, I just pick up on the 5G thing just a little bit there. Our industry providers are definitely rolling out services. There's a lot for them to tackle. Alan talked a little bit about the supply chain situation, and that's a big thing, and that box has to be checked. But there's also significant infrastructure work that our companies in America have to do. There's been a lot of frequency bands opened up to them. I think I mentioned that. And how do you make all that work seamlessly and sort of glue it onto an LTE network? And so you can merge pretty much seamlessly from the LTE network to 5G. I don't know if these are all the same challenges that China faces, but we've got quite an installed base of LTE here, so you can't just drop it and move on. I think we're behind, notionally, but I also understand that there's, we have a different situation here, different landscape.
Definitely.
It doesn't have to be the case that we will remain behind. So we can, depending on how we roll it out, depending on how we think about that transition, and then the usage of not only the mid-band spectrum, which is where a lot of it's emerging, but to also see how you could hybridize and use high band and dense urban environments or other things. So there is hope. There are some key things going on, but I think we just have to think in a nationally strategic way, just as plans have been issued.
Yeah, and we'll be looking for that STAA report on that in the next couple of months. Very interesting.
Absolutely. Yep.
Tim, Alan, Jim, thank you all for joining us today. With that wraps up the editorial part of this, but stay tuned. We have some additional thoughts from our underwriter, Cisco, along with NextGov publisher James Hansen. Thanks all.
Awesome. Thank you again, Aaron, Tim, Alan, and Jim, for that insights around the current state and future state of federal networks. I think it was a great intro into our next conversation, which I'm excited to continue with Walter Makish. Walter is the Director of Civilian Operations at Cisco. In this role, Walter leads a team dedicated to connecting people with technology to help federal agencies transform their IT and accelerate their mission. So with that, let's get started. Walter, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, James.
So we heard a lot around, obviously, of course, EIS and TIC, and Alan talked about a couple dedicated agency solicitations around SD-WAN. And then Jim talked about certainly the work that they've been doing with CISA around the TIC 3.0 guidance. What can SD-WAN bring to government's future network and TIC 3.0 architectures?
Yeah, it's a perfect question. What I heard a lot of from Alan, Jim, and Tim is that it's going to be different for every agency, and that's certainly the case, and different both in the way that they deploy it, but also kind of the speed, the pace, the phased approach that they choose. So I was looking at a study, 1,200 network decision makers. Of 1,200 network decision makers, 95% said that they would be deploying SD-WAN within the next 2 years in some way, shape, or form. 95% is obviously an enormous number. We're at a tipping point. It's no longer a question of whether agencies are going to move towards that technology. It's a question, again, of how fast and how they do it. I think the most important part to keep in mind right now is what are the technologies that are coming down the pike as it relates to SD-WAN. The first is built-in security. So as you're looking at SD-WAN platforms, something that we're seeing a lot more of today as a differentiator between those platforms is having that security built into the actual platform itself rather than as a bolt-on. So that's extremely important to kind of do the due diligence on and study before making any of those decisions about how, what vendor, so on and so forth. Next would be an integrated management platform. So that management platform, I hear from customers on a very regular basis that they don't want multiple panes of glass, right? There's a lot to manage within the network. And for that, they need a tool that is going to be purpose built for multiple parts of the network. That's going to mean the WAN, that's going to mean the LAN, that the security tools, all of the above. So that single pane of glass is absolutely critical. And then the last piece is the visibility and analytics. And certainly that's the one that is the most exciting. Not only visibility and analytics to inform decision-making and configurations and things that need to be done by that person, but also visibility and analytics that can contribute to real-time platform decision-making. So AI, right, machine learning, that is becoming a real thing within SD-WAN. So as they're looking at the application performance and the visibility into the network, is that platform smart enough to be able to make decisions on the fly to ensure that you're getting the outcomes that you're wanting, that optimized network performance and application performance?
So they also talked about, obviously not all agencies are the same. So if as agencies are considering SD-WAN technologies and looking at that kind of full picture, how do you coach agencies on making smart risk-based IT investments that are planning for those future technologies like AI?
So the way that we work with customers, and we're doing it today with some of those that have actually been awarded through the EIS contract, as Alan talked about a little bit earlier, it's incredibly important, more important than ever, that we actually consider the mission and that we look at the mission of each individual agency and potentially sub-agency bureau, et cetera. That mission needs to inform the way that we build a plan. So as you look at your IT infrastructure today, in order to figure out where that IT infrastructure needs to be tomorrow or 3 to 5 years from now even, you have to look at what are we trying to enable as it relates to the mission. And this is something that becomes more and more important as we move from hardware to software and some of these more traditional technologies. The complexities are huge. There's a lot more decision-making points, and therefore we need to understand what those outcomes, those desired outcomes are going to be before making any kind of a recommendation. Once that mission layer is understood, the next layer down is the application layer. For us, application is absolutely king. The way that the users are going to be interacting with the IT infrastructure or with the network is going to be based on their experience or how that application is going to be performing. So that needs to be taken into account. When you look at applications, it's going to be important to look at who's using them, right? How are they using them? What are the underpinnings? So some of these applications are going to be going back to databases or frankly other applications and going to need to be interacting or pulling data from those other sites. That's increasingly important and has to be kept in mind as we design for SD-WAN. SD-WAN, at the end of the day, the reason that customers want to move to SD-WAN is for better application performance, right? Whether it's QoS or whether it's just a beefy application that frankly needs to be slimmed down a little bit. These are the things that are going to make or break whether SD-WAN was a successful deployment at most customers.
And so in that kind of smart risk-based approach, where does security fall into that in terms of as you're evaluating whether, where the vulnerabilities are and what tools you're using? So, I mean, obviously, TIC 3.0 is a big part of that. We can all agree that the cloud is here and they're trying to build a policy that meets the needs of today, but also designed for future technologies like AI and 5G, which you heard a lot of from Alan, Tim, and Jim. How do you create like a gateway architecture? I guess first question, like what's the security component and that risk-based approach and that roadmap, and then how do you build a gateway architecture that meets those needs from today and tomorrow?
So it goes back to a couple of things, right, that have been said in terms of the built-in security, right? So the processing that happens at the device, that is incredibly important. In order to make some kind of key security decisions, what needs to be understood is what is the personal identification information that is actually inherent in the data and actually being used by those applications. So it makes me think of currently what's going on with the pandemic and how we're trying to, in some cases, react to the changing needs, right, of that user base. That personal information is going to be even more critical in terms of understanding where is it going, right? You've got home users, you've got increased move to the cloud. With SD-Wan comes the ability to actually track some of that data coming from on-prem and then going off-premise to the cloud and being able to see how is that PII being protected. And that's going to be the most important thing, is visibility, not only inside of the network and on the applications as we know it today, but actually looking at what that cloud environment is going to be potentially for literally tomorrow or potentially for tomorrow a couple of years from now, so that we can design security that's going to ensure that those cloud applications are just as protected as those applications on-prem.
Can you dive into that a little bit deeper around the pandemic? Because I know that you guys certainly have been supporting a lot of agencies as they've moved to a almost entirely remote workforce. In addition, like it's just maybe dive a little deeper on some of the things that you've seen in terms of this move to this kind of new normal and the reliance really on next generation kind of cloud enabled network.
Yeah, it follows the same premises that we've been doing. It's just to a 10th degree. I mean, when it really comes down to it, traffic efficiencies, right, a robust enough network and optimized application performance. These are the things that our users are going to continue to rely on, even though they're going to be coming to us from a different place. I would say that the actions that we've taken to make these networks more robust are certainly here to stay. I don't think there are too many people that would argue with that, because we have to worry about future waves and future pandemics for that matter. I will say, never been so proud to work for Cisco or to work with the federal government as I have been within these last 2 months. I mean, it has been absolutely incredible to see the way that the interaction and the true partnership has gone, and to see what outcomes we've been able to enable together. I've seen both customers and people within Cisco do things in a matter of hours, days, and weeks, that have taken months and years. And so understanding kind of what progress we've made and continuing down that path, ensuring that we're making decisions that are going to be future-proof, that are going to lend to almost a permanent plan as it relates to what do we do in these types of situations. I have more faith than ever that we're going to be able to get through this safely, strongly, and then move to the next one and be ready for it.
I agree. Thank you for that comment, because we've been covering it across GovExec and NextGov, and we are seeing just tremendous resilience from both government and industry partners like Cisco. So I 100% agree with you. One thing that I'd like to kind of pivot to a little bit is the folks on the last conversation and panel talked a lot about the need to get compute power to the edge to analyze the increasing amounts of data being collected, and having a modernization plan that kind of allows you to get there. Going back to kind of Cisco's smart risk-based approach to modernization. What are some other best practices that you've seen in kind of creating a modernization roadmap that accomplishes this goal, whether it's through contracts like EIS or otherwise? Like, what are some best practices for agencies in terms of trying to move compute power to the edge?
So TIC 3.0, right, and EIS are just perfect opportunities for our customers, as we have seen them do, to take that step back and to say, okay, let's just imagine. I know from what Jim said, right, we got to look at what investments are out there, but let's just imagine we could do this over, we could build it from the ground up, and then let's see if we can make that iterative approach to getting to that ultimate goal of where you want your agency to be and where you want your IT infrastructure to be, to enable that mission. As it relates to edge computing, that is one of those pieces that, as we move towards technologies like artificial intelligence, continue down the line of IoT, move towards 5G, as we move towards those technologies, things like data at the edge has to be a part of the considerations that you take, and EIS is that perfect opportunity to be able to really consider how it is that you want to architect your network to be ready for those technologies. Specifically, as it relates to moving your data to the edge, there are two things that I would recommend really looking at very closely. First one is your services that are being performed at the edge. And generally what that's going to mean for government customers is how is the citizen actually interacting with the agency, the IT network, and the applications more important. So once we understand how those citizens are interacting with the government customer, and as well as how they're interacting with their systems, then we know what data to put towards the edge, because that's going to be one of the most important and one of the most critical places where you're going to want it and going to want to design for an optimized experience. The next piece is the cloud, and that's the obvious one, right? But it's not easy. It's obvious nevertheless, in terms of you want to make sure that as your applications are going out to the cloud, but then needing that data that's going to reside on-prem and never won't due to that PII, that's where you're going to need a very clear map of what those application underpinnings are going to look like. In a lot of cases, I've seen a lot of customers that choose to use multiple tools in order to do that mapping, because it is that critical and because it is that challenging. But once we figure out what the services at the edge look like, once we figure out what the application mapping looks like and needs to look like, then we can decide and make those very critical decisions about where the data needs to reside and what data is kind of in a perfect position to be able to move towards the edge. It's a tough decision, but it's certainly a critical one.
So I know we are at our time, and if there are any questions that have come in that we didn't get to, we will follow up post-event and work with Walter and our panelists to get answers to those. So I guess I'll just, Walter, you have 30 to 60 seconds. Why don't you take us home, and is there anything in terms of our current environment in terms of current to future networks? How do we get to that big network? What is like one actionable thing that you might leave for our government attendees as they're working on solicitations through EIS or leveraging EIS, or thinking about what TIC 3.0 is going to mean for their network? Any last thing you like to highlight from some of the things that we talked about, or some of the things that Tim, Alan, and Jim talked about?
I would just say that planning is everything, and so at times where we have opportunities to go and really make a change and make a difference. So TIC 3.0 comes to mind, EIS comes to mind. These are critical impasses, and as we've explained kind of internally and to our CEO, these are decisions that won't be made again for a long time to come. So it is just so critical that we sit down, both industry and government, and explore what haven't we thought of, right? And what do we need to be ready for in 3 to 5 years, or even 10 years? It's really exciting. I think that you're seeing a lot of the convergence of the TIC 3.0, EIS, and then Sd-Wan, and some of the technologies that are kind of popping up right now. It's perfect. It's almost like somebody planned it. So Alan, if that's what you did, amazing. But it's just to take advantage of these critical impasses and to ensure that there's that healthy partnership dialogue, and in the end, a plan that we can follow.
No, absolutely. 100% agree. And I definitely think that we need to be planning now for those future technologies that are coming down the road. And those technologies like 5G and AI are coming, and they're coming fast. And they're big transformational technologies and capabilities that government is going to use and really needs to use to deliver on the mission. So I think that we need that healthy partnership. And I think government would agree with you. So with that, we have reached the end of our program. Again, I want to thank all of our speakers today for joining us. Thank you, our audience, for tuning in. This event would not be possible with the support of our underwriter, Cisco. So thank you very much. This full webcast has been recorded and it will be sent to you by the end of the week. Keep a watch out for it in your email, and please be sure to share this conversation with your colleagues. I think it was fantastic. So thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, Walter.